All right. Okay, well, hello everyone from the Crested Butte Museum in Crested Butte, Colorado. My name is Melinda Holm. I am the director here at the museum, and we're super excited to start something new. First off, thank you all for attending on Zoom, and we have a nice little live audience here that are going to enjoy this fun new program that we have. It's called Voices of Crested Butte, Past and Present. Since we've significantly increased our oral histories here at the Museum of our old-timers, we realized we needed to capture these stories of our mid-timers and make sure that they're shared for generations to come. So I discussed this idea with Dwayne while we were doing one of our trips this summer, our van trips, and we both came up with this great idea of capturing it, calling it Voices of Crested Butte, Past and Present. So with the first theme and installation, we thought about how about we turn the table on those who used to interview people here in Crested Butte after these stories, and now we get to interview them. So we're going to get their stories. We're looking forward to hearing what they're going to share with us. And because of this, we can do it because of your donations. And in order to do a donation, you can also become a member of the museum. I'll share those details at the very end of this program. And we hope that you consider visiting our webpage, Crested Butte Museum, for all of our upcoming events and to make a donation or become a member. So now on with our first show of the series, featuring Sandy Cortner, hosted by Dwayne Vandenbush.
Thank you, Melinda, and thank you, Sandy, for coming. She's number one. We're going to try and do about 8 or 9 of these. Sandy has been here since 1964. So she's a real mid-timer. They always tell me that when you're here 25 years or more, you're an honorary native. So none of us can be actual natives because we weren't born here. But the first thing I want you to look at is these books that are right behind us here, Crested Butte, Love at First Sight, and Crested Butte Stories Through My Lens. These are 2 great books that Sandy has written. Also, and I know the people watching on Zoom can't see it, but right to my left are a series of tremendous photographs, probably about 50 of them. And Sandy has taken those photographs through the years of the old timers, and they are incredibly valuable today. So we're going to take a look with Sandy Cortner now, who has been here, as I said, since '64. She is an author. She is a photographer. She is an actress. She is a softball player. She's been involved in a myriad of other activities for almost 60 years in Crested Butte. So, Sandy, right off the top, I want you to tell us a little bit about what brought you here and a little bit about your years in Crested Butte.
Well, my parents brought me here, which is unusual because most people come to Crested Butte for the skiing or because their friends were already here. But I was about 2 days out of my high school graduation, and my stepfather brought my mom and my 2 sisters and myself to Crested Butte for the summer to attend the Law Science Academy that Dr. Smith was putting on. And so we were here for about 6 weeks, I think, and that was where I first met Crested Butte. Did I answer the whole thing?
Yeah, you know, I think that says Crested Butte, Love at First Sight, but
that's my second book, Love at First Sight.
Yeah, but reading your books again, and I read them again after a while, it really wasn't quite Love at First Sight.
It's not Love at First Sight. We got to town and we drove in after 2 days of driving. We come down the highway and then we come down the hill into town, and we go real slowly through the town. There's no cars, there's no people, there's these boarded up buildings, and it's overcast, and the wind's blowing, and it's kind of dusty, and dust is coming up. So we drive all the way to the Forest Green Hotel, which at the times it was called the Academy Arms, and that's where Dr. Smith had his headquarters, so to speak, and we had to check in. And we checked in and we got ourselves, they gave us a house that my stepfather had rented for $100 a week, which was pretty outrageous at that time. And went over there, and then the next morning we woke up and it had snowed. So this is like June the 4th, June the 5th, something like that. And there was snow on the ground. I'm like, God, what are we doing here, right? Nobody my age. I walked around and there was nobody my age, and it was just gloomy and cold. I mean, you know how cold it can get in June. So no, it was not love at first sight. And I eventually got my mom to front me a bus ticket home. And then once I got home, I went, oh, home isn't all that great either. So I came back, and then I started to fall in love with it. It just grew on me. I think what really got me the most was when you come into town and you see those little streams running in the pasture. And I thought they were streams, but they're really ditches. I didn't know they were ditches for cows to drink. Or no, I wasn't sure what that, but I knew that they were pretty. And the first morning we were here, actually, but the second day we were here, we came home and found a loaf of bread on our kitchen table. Because nobody locked their doors. I don't even think we had keys to that rental house. I'm pretty sure we probably didn't. No one locked their doors. No one locked their cars. It was, so anyway, she left us bread. She was an old timer by the name of, we called her Grandma Stina. And I think her picture's up there. So.
One of the poignant things in your book was you mentioned that when you first got here, you tried to leave a couple of times, and you were leaving one time. One of the old timers said, "Oh, you'll be back because you're one of us now."
Yes, Mary Lennox said that. She ran the liquor store, up the block, and she and her husband were the sweetest people. And he would sit out front on an upended Coke crate that they used to bring the Coca-Cola bottles in crates. So I just put this crate on end, and he'd sit there, and you go in, and she had on this dark dress, kind of, really slow. And I told her one time when I was trying to leave, and she said, "Oh, you come back now, dear. You're one of us now." She said, Crested Butte will be here for you.
Sandy, with all these great photographs you've taken of the old timers, number one, how did you get the idea to do that? And number two, did you have any trouble convincing some of the old timers to have their pictures taken?
Well, George Sibley is the person who got me started on the old timers. George ran the Crested Butte Chronicle. And I had gone in there and asked George for a job. And he said, well, it's pretty much a one-man operation. It was all of 4 pages. And he said, I'm doing an interview with Emil Lunk. And if you could go by and take a picture, and it's a good picture, I will put a credit line on it for you, but I can't pay you. So I did. And so Emil Lunk, I didn't have a flash at the time, so I had to put him next to the window so that the window light would come on him. And then he got his bandoneon, his instrument, that's sort of like an accordion. And he got that out, and he had his red necktie on. And so I shot him really tight, and he had all these wrinkles. I think he was like the oldest old timer. And George really liked it, but I reversed it. The very first one was Frank Storica. And I went to Frank's house to take a picture for one of George's interviews. And I said, Frank, could you come outside so I could take the picture outside? And so he did, and he just kind of leaned on his fence, and he just lit up a brand new cigar. So I took a picture of him with a cigar out to here. George loved it. He said, wow, I'd never seen him with a brand new cigar. Usually he just has this stub of a cigar that he's chewing on while he's bartending. He and his wife ran Frankie Gal's bar up the street. And so he got me started. And then after that, I just it just sort of happened. It was like I came and started to get gas right out here, Tony McGillich. And he was pumping my gas, and I said, oh, Tony, can I take your picture? And he said, oh, sure. And I clicked off about 2 frames, and he got done pumping the gas, and I paid him and drove off. And I mean, that's how I took many of them. That's the second part of your question.
You know, I'm going to come back to that in a second, but one of the legendary pictures you took, of course, I think you mentioned Emil Lunk.
Yeah.
And you got these guys in Frank and Gals. You got Emil Lunk, Tony Danny, Frank, Ralph Falsetto, Johnny Panion. And I think it was taken around Armistice Day of 67. And I always thought that 50 years earlier, those guys are trying to kill each other and in World War I, and now they're in Frank and Gals.
All sharing a beer.
All sharing a beer.
I think George called me up and said, hey, you got to come get these guys. They're all together, man. And so I raced over and took their picture.
Second part of the question is, did you have any trouble convincing any of them that they were to get their picture taken?
Well, once I got done taking a lot of the men, I started in on the women. And Martha Sporsich was the funniest one because she said, I ain't no old timer. Get away with it. Yeah, no. And so it took me, I had to catch her while she was at a fish fry, not looking at me. And the picture came out really nicely. But a lot of them wanted their picture taken because I would map the pictures and they would sign them.
Yeah.
And then we put them on the wall at Frank and Gal's bar, and they called it the Rogues Gallery.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of them secretly wanted to be up there, especially Lyle McNeil. He was always posing for me. And, you know, when someone poses, it's just such a tough, it's just kind of go, never mind. But I got him finally.
So they wanted to be on the wall.
Yeah.
Good. Sandy, when you came here in the 60s, the railroad tracks had been pulled out in 55. The school closed up in 67. The mine shut down in 52.
Yeah.
Describe a little bit about the decades, the 60s, and then I want you to move into the 70s when some of the new people began to come in, and tell us a little bit about how things began to change.
I think with the 60s, because there were so few new people coming in, it was mostly the ski area employees, people that came to ski and maybe went, ooh, I'd really like a summer home. So it was a lot easier time. And people were, and especially the old timers, they were so honest and so open and so helpful. And I think a lot of the people that came in the 60s were the same way back. It was sort of like, oh, okay, this is how people are supposed to live. And then as more and more people came in, especially hippies that maybe didn't understand that I'm not quite sure how to put it, how that worked, you know, how I'll take care of you, you take care of me, you're honest to me, I'm honest to you. And so a lot of people that came in just weren't in that mind frame. And so that's when some of the old timers were like backing off on them, I think more in the late 70s, mid 70s. And then what happened is the town council election comes up, and a lot of the newer people ran for the offices of town council and mayor. And I think once those newer people got in, then that really changed it, a lot of it, the fabric of it. But you still had that sense of community. And that was a lot of it because everyone's interrelated. I mean, I would talk to Nettie Kapushin or Trudy Yucklich, friends of mine, and say, well, now how is Joe Blow related to John Doe? And she'd say, oh, yeah, well, he's my mother's second cousin. So I guess that makes him my third cousin once removed. And then Trudy would just go, I don't know, we're just related, that's all.
What caused the old timers to give gradual acceptance to the new hippies or trust funders that came in?
Oh, boy. I don't know. That's a tough one. I think it's just like, I don't know, let me check my cheat sheet. It's just that I think the younger people that came in started to adapt. I think it was a slow adaptation, and it goes person to person. It's like Freddie Heyer, who ran the T-bar lift at the ski area, and he lived right next to Josiah, who was an old timer. And if Joe had a problem or needed some help, Freddie would help him without being asked. and then I think that sort of thing is how it spread. And then Joe probably said to his friend, well, that guy, really did me a favor. He chopped my wood, something. And so I think that makes a big difference.
Maybe said he's not so bad.
Yeah, they're not so bad.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about, you got a great little chapter in your book on when AMAX was trying to put the mine in on Mount Emmons. And a bunch of people went up with flares and put a sign up on the side of Red Lady Basin. As much as you can, I'd like to have you recall that, because we probably can't use the word that the flares.
Okay, I'll tell you. I got a phone call Saturday night of Flushing, and the person said, be out with your camera to take a picture, aim it at Red Lady as soon as it's dark. And I'm like, oh man, I was having such a good time Flushing. Now I gotta, get it together. So I did. I put it on a tripod. And so pretty soon you could see flares on the breast of Red Lady, and they were slowly lit up, and they spelled out AMAX. Everyone came out of the bars to look at it, and came out of the restaurants. The church bells were ringing, and everyone came out with, look. So then it was just right before I did my second book. I called up one of the guys that I knew was involved, and I said, how'd you guys do that anyway? And he said, well, we decided to, the monkey wrench gang. He said, we thought we could do that. So we sent somebody to Denver to buy 200 flares, because we knew anybody who buys 200 flares in Gunnison County, big suspicious situation. So somebody comes back with 200 flares. Then they had it all figured out. They hiked up there during the afternoon, and they stomped out in the snow the letters after they got their skis off, because it was still, ski season. And so they marked out the letters with their boots, and then they placed the flares. And then he says, after a few Jack Daniels, they brought up a lot of booze to fortify them mentally and anyways, otherwise. And he said, so we lit them. And he said, afterwards, we went racing down to town. Everyone put on their skis, raced to town, and then all of them sort of at different times, nonchalantly, they strolled into one of the bars, and everyone in the bar was going, hey, did you see that? Did you see that? And they were like, oh, yeah, good. Pretending they didn't know a thing. Yes, one guy that I talked to said, man, he says they had to do it today and to go viral.
Their identities have never been known.
No, some people know them.
Yeah, you know them.
I know them. Well, I know at least 3 of them.
Yeah.
And one of them I didn't find out for many, many years.
You're not at liberty to say anything about that right now.
In the book, I just use their initials.
No, that's one of the...
They're family men, they all had jobs.
Yeah.
And they're like upstanding citizens.
That's one of the great photos. So, Sandy, the next question is, there's always been a little bit of a rivalry, well, in fact, a good rivalry between Crested Butte and Gunnison. In the old days, it was the Catholic immigrant coal miners against the Anglo ranchers and businessmen from Gunnison. Have you seen that since you've been here? And I want you to talk a little bit about that.
I've seen it a little bit, but I had one lady explain it to me, Michelle Asakawa, who proofread my first book, and she explained it to me that the Crested Butte was always considered the mining community, and Gunnison was always considered the ranching community. And it was like they just didn't quite mesh. Although Richard Guerreri, who is a friend of mine from Gunnison, and he's a rancher, but he started out as a miner, and his dad was a miner. And so it's sort of interconnected, but I think during the 70s and 80s, it just got a little tense. But if you look at the whole picture, I think I don't know what to think. I can't really speak to it.
There were a lot of fist fights at dances. I know that. And, you know, the worm is kind of turned. In the old days, most of the wealth was in Gunnison.
Yep.
And there wasn't a whole lot of wealth in Crested Butte. Since the age of snow, as we all know, a lot of the wealth is now in Crested Butte and lesser wealth in Gunnison. So, as we say, the worm has turned. And
I think what it is now, I used to think Crested Butte is a young person's town, and now I think it's a rich person's town.
Crested Butte has had a lot of celebrations. We still do. Tell us a little bit about the celebrations and the ones that you kind of like the best and why.
I like Memorial Day the best. I think because it's not a celebration for tourists. It's a celebration, and all these people that used to live here but don't live here anymore, they come back, they decorate their graves, they connect with their relatives that are still here, and then they all get together, and the guys that are still can get into their uniforms, like Willard Ruggiero, he could still get into his. And if they can't, they can just wear a helmet. And they would get ready and march down that street. And it wasn't a parade like 4th of July or Washington. It's a march. It's a march, and it's special. And then they march all the way out to the cemetery. And when they get there, they're all like, oh, thank God, we're here, we made it, you know, because these are older people and they marched. Pittsburgh would call cadence, and then when he got too old to call cadence, which is, you know, that song they go, Crested Butte is mighty good, and then they would march to that. And then Tuck did it for a long time, who was a beloved bus driver here. And then get out to the cemetery, and all the relatives would be there already if they hadn't watched the march. And used to be most of them would be there, and they park their cars along the cemetery roads, and then the guys would come up and present colors of the three guys with the flags, and then they would all visit. They would chit chat. They would hug. They would say, "Oh man, I haven't seen you for a whole year. Now what?" And so to me, that was the specialness of it. I mean, that was like Crested.
Tell us about the totem pole.
Totem pole. The totem pole is why I wrote this second book. Somebody had a story of how the totem pole came to be, and they had their story wrong. And I went, I have to write a second book so these stories get passed down correctly. So the totem pole was 1973 was the art festival, and it was like a really blowout art festival that year. And somebody decided, hey man, we got to have like a special piece of art, like a totem pole, right? So there were 5 woodworkers in town at that time, which was pretty amazing to have 5 of them. And so Joe Rosman went and got a huge log from up Kepler Pass, and he put it right near where our totem pole park is. And these 5 people carved on it. Each of them had their own design. And so they carved their design on it. And then at the end, and they did it with chainsaws and chisels. And then after they got done, at the end of the festival, on the last afternoon, they got in a backhoe and some people that helped from the ski area with a cherry picker or something, and they pulled the thing upright into a hole that someone had dug already, okay, and got it upright, and everyone's standing around cheering. And eventually, of course, they poured concrete there at the bottom of the hole to hold it up. And then Billy Folger had done a special thing, and he had to hang from the cherry picker the next couple of days and stick in the horns that go on the side. And I don't know that they're there anymore, but so then so that lasted a really long time. And then someone from the town realized that the bottom was rotting. So they had to cut the bottom off and reset it. And when they did, they turned it slightly. It did face straight up 3rd Street. That's how it originally faced. And it doesn't anymore, which is too bad.
You know, one of the other things was Flauschink, when Sibley and Art Norris and Wirtz got together and started Flauschink, and that's become quite a deal in Crested Butte. Tell us a little bit about that, and maybe about why George and the other 2 guys started it. What were they thinking of?
Now you're going to have to ask George this in a couple of
I will.
months, okay? You didn't take it from me. I think they were thinking, at least George told me once, he said, it was just a shame that the ski area had to end with just like, we're done. He says, we should end it with a blowout sort of a thing, you know, a flushing out of the winter and all the bad things that happened. And so I think that's where the idea came up. And then George made up this huge story about the guy from Ugra, Sorbia, who came into Frank Gall bar and drank out of the boot and put his, I mean, it just goes on and on. Only George.
You know, he told me about the 4th of July race that he also was involved in getting, and from Gothic to Crested Butte.
Yeah.
So the runners start, and at that time they thought, boy, this is going to take them a long time. And all at once, somebody yelled to George, "Here they come." So George got a bag of lime from Tony and stretched it right out in front of Tony's Conoco, just in time for the guys to finish.
Yeah, the finish line. Yeah. Yeah.
Sandy, Crested Butte is a great mountain town, and I want you to tell me what you think might be unique about Crested Butte as opposed to towns like Telluride, Aspen, Breckenridge, and others.
The people. The people. I think because the people that these guys stayed here after the mines closed, a lot of towns, when their mines closed, most of it, everybody left. And then new people that came in didn't have any of the history that these people gave us. And the history that they gave us was just their personal history. They told me about the mines and about different buildings in town. And I think that's what makes it unique. The people that came in, that got to know those old timers, they passed that on. They shared it. They exulted in it, you know? I mean, it was like, wow, it's like a town. It's a family. And people today, even the young people today that didn't know any of those people, because they're all dead, even today, you know, it's a potluck for somebody who's down on their luck. Or let's start a GoFundMe page for somebody who really needs a hand. And I think a lot of that comes from what they learned, whether it was, you know, overtly, I don't know, from these old timers. I think that's what makes it special.
You know, I think what you're saying is a lot of these other towns were precious metal mining communities. Crested Butte, I think, is the only ski area I ever knew that became it was a coal mining community and then became a great ski area.
Yeah, I have to tell you one thing that Rudy Sedmak told me when the trains went out of Crested Butte and they had on the side, it said Crested Butte Coal. And so the guys coming back from war, when they saw these trains go by, because they all came back on train, they were like, yeah, Crested Butte Coal. It was just a real bonus for them.
Shipping all over the nation. Your views on Crested Butte today, how has it changed and where do you think it's going? And what are your thoughts about where it's going?
It's going where it wants to go. It's going to go wherever it goes. And, you know, there's not a whole lot anyone like me can do to change it. I'm hoping it's going in a good direction, though. But ask a different part of the question. I can't remember.
Now, I want you to tell us, you know, how has Crested Butte changed and where do you think it's going today and your thoughts on where it's going today?
It has changed. Well, obviously it's changed because it has grown amazing. I mean, it's just huge. Compared to what it was, it's just absolutely huge. If you compare one of the pictures in my book, like right at the beginning where you see, you know, this little town and then to come into town today, I came in with my husband who hadn't been here for a while, and he's like, oh my God, that's the biggest change, I think. And the other big change is, I think, people come in and feel a lot more privileged, like you owe me, or the town owes me, And the other really big change that I really don't like is the BOZAR, the Board of Zoning, has suddenly decided to tell everyone how to build their houses, right down to you have to plant a tree and it has to be here. It can't be over there. So those are changes that are not good.
Any good changes with regard to what's happened since 60s, 70s, and 80s? I'll take that maybe as a no.
Just go to the next question. I can't speak to that.
Tell me the legacy of the old timers, and I'll maybe put a little story in here. I was at Frank and Gals after having interviewed Johnny Panion, who had taken me up to the Buckley mine just to the south of town, and they're all having a beer, and I'm asking them questions. And Johnny had showed me how the coal came from the coal mine down the tram into the tipple, then to the railroad, and I didn't quite understand that. So I'm asking John at Frank and Gals a question about how it come in. Johnny Panion leaned over to me and he hit me and he says, God, and I want to mention the other word, Vandenbush, what the hell's the matter with you? Are you stupid or something? And I didn't take any offense to that. But tell me what you think the legacy of all those great old timers was and is.
Well, I kind of touched on that because I really feel the legacy is the honesty and the goodness of those people and how they pass that on, but they didn't pass it on consciously. It was just something that they were, and that people that met them and got to know them then became sort of like that. It was like, oh, I would like to be like that guy. He's so nice. There's people like Nettie Cushion's mom, Ruth. And every time I walked into her house, it was like, oh, sit down, dear. Are you hungry? Let me get you something to eat. And that's just what they did. I mean, most of the women were that way, They
had a lot of interesting customs from the old country. And my dad had born in Belgium, and he always used the term old country, and so did they. Yeah. It was the old country. What are some of the customs that they had from their food, maybe the way they did things?
Well, I especially like their food, pizza. Okay, you can't talk about Crested Butte without talking about pizza, which looks like a strudel. And Trudy Yakwich and I made it a couple of years ago. I did a story on it for the Crested Butte magazine. And it's real hard to make, takes a lot of time, and then you have to cook up everything and pull the dough out and put it all on and roll it all up and let it rise. And then you got to let it rise again, and then you have to put it in the oven. And they did this all the time for any special occasion, especially Christmas. It was what they made for Christmas. So that's one of my favorite customs. But then there's other ones like they would have pig's feet and pig's blood. They made something out of pig's blood. And I thought, oh my God.
It's called blood sausage.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, and Botsy would do that, I think.
I grew up on a farm in Upper Michigan, and we did the same thing they did. My dad would have a calf or a steer, shoot it right in the middle of the forehead, drop it, he'd slit the throat, and I would have a pan to collect the blood.
And then your mom or
take the blood to my mother and put potatoes in it and carrots in it, and then we would clean out the intestines and put that inside, and it was sausage.
Yeah.
And it was very delicious, but you couldn't eat too much of it because it was rich. So everybody had those old customs. And the old idea was when you killed an animal, nothing went to waste.
No.
You pretty much ate everything.
And Bertel and Michelle Beltry wrote their cookbook.
Oh, yeah.
They had all those old recipes in there. And I've tried a few of them. And I want to try the pizza one, but I'm afraid to do it by myself because Darlene Halazon told me that her son learned to make pizza from his grandmother. And she said, yeah, he made 2 last night. And I'm like, wow, Darlene. And she said, but he got started so late, he stayed up till after midnight so he could take them out of the oven. It's just, it's amazing, a boy would be,
Yeah.
you don't see that often.
Best job you ever had in Crested Butte and why?
Best job. Best job. Oh, I've had so many. I guess working for the newspapers. Sorry.
You're fine.
Cut that out. So much for the sheet. Never mind. I worked for about 8 different mastheads while I was, since I came here. And I think those were the best jobs I had because they got me out to meet people. They got me doing the interviews that had to run in the newspaper. So I was able to meet all these people, take their pictures, and nothing was ever the same. Every day was different. Every issue was different. Every minute was different. So I think those times working for the paper, those were my best jobs.
A sad note, what was the impact on the town of Crested Butte following the explosion of the Crested Butte Bank, which killed 3 people?
The Crested Butte Bank explosion, I think it brought a lot of people together. They were looking through the rubble because they weren't sure who all was in there because they had only just barely opened the bank. It was like 2 minutes after 9 or something. And they brought down every backhoe in town. And then they would dig, and then somebody would say, in case someone was,
Yeah.
help me.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, it was the ski area sent down ski patrol. I'm sorry, I still get emotional over it.
Yeah, that was a tough one. And then, if you go back about 100 years, the Jokerville mine exploded and killed 61 people, not 3. And just imagine what happened at that time. And, the coal company said that no blame was attached to the company, even though there was plenty of blame attached. So there's been a lot of tragedies in Crested Butte, and going through the newspapers year by year. I mean, every year you find out 3 or 4 people get killed in the mines, a rock fall or get kicked in the head by a mule or something like that. So,
well, that's why some of the old timers that I interviewed, some really liked working in the mines. But I remember Willard Rogera said he hated it because it was so close. And you had to go in there, and it was a small tunnel, and you just had to pick from above your head, and it would fall down. And he said, the minute I could get out of there, I did. But Rudy Sedmak loved working in the mines. He said, yeah, it was warm. They took good care of us. He must have had a bigger shaft that he was in. So yeah, so that was interesting. Some of them liked it, some of them hated it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. One of the notes I have is in the different mines, you had different veins.
Yeah.
The big mine, you could stand up.
Right. Peanut was where Willard was telling me he worked.
And a lot of times the guys would have rubber, from the tires on their knees because they had to work on their knees. And in England, there's so tremendously sad stories about kids going into the mines at the age of 7 or 8 years old because they were small enough to get into those veins. And they would go in the morning and then come out in the evening, and everything was dark when they went in, dark when they came out, worked 7 days a week. And many of them died, and this has been authenticated, at the age of 19, never having seen the light of day after they were 7 years old.
Well, thank God, I don't think that ever happened here.
No, it didn't. We're going to go off script now, and I want you to tell me a little bit about your association with Tony Mihelich and Conoco, which is where we are right now, the Crested Butte Museum.
Tony Mihelich and the Conoco was where you came if you wanted to buy a fishing license. That was my first encounter with Tony, was buying a fishing license. And then, of course, he had the gas pumps, only gas pumps in town at that time when I was here. And that's where you would buy your gas. So, and he would pump it. This is before the days when you pumped your own. So he always had to come out and pump it. And then he would always have that pot belly right behind you, fired up, and the guys would sit around the pot belly and yammer. And then he would sit at his desk and do, he was the nicest, sweetest guy. And it wasn't until after his death I found out that he had been scouted by the big leagues for baseball. I guess he was a hell of a baseball player. And when you see pictures of him younger, I've seen like in Myrtle's cookbook, and he's got these broad shoulders, a handsome dude, you know?
Yeah, one of the great stories is talking about that pot-bellied stove when ex-President Carter would come in with his children from Atlanta. Two Secret Service men would come in the door, and anybody was in here, they would ask them politely if they would leave so the president could come in, sit by the pot-bellied stove, and have 1 hour with Tony Mihelich, asking him questions. Melinda, we about out of time? All right, I got one more question for Sandy. Some of the people don't remember this, but Crested Butte used to burn a lot of wood and have a lot of wood stoves.
That's right, I had one.
And there was a big haze over the town.
Yeah, I had one. I'll tell you, wood stoves were a giant pain in the butt. I've been looking for property with my husband in Gunnison, and they proudly advertised, and a wood stove in the living room. And I go, oh, you don't want that. Yeah, so they were giving out particulates. And finally, the town council said, you know, it's gotten so bad. Adele Bachman, who lives up on the hill, she would look out over town and not even be able to barely see it.
Yeah.
And so they finally said, okay, within the next year, everyone's got to convert either to no wood stove and just go electric for your heat, or you have to get a wood burning stove that's, it was specially okayed by the town because it was non-polluting. And so everyone did. And boy, it cleaned up the air big time. The smell of that smoke walking home was, sometimes it was nice, and other times it was. Yeah, wood burning stoves were really hard. And that's all we had because nobody had any money. So it was like, if you could get a wood burning stove, all you had to do was go get a guy with a chainsaw who would cut you a bunch of wood. And then I split my own.
Sandy, thank you very much. I think we're out of time. And
Open it up to questions.
oh yeah, well, that's what I was going to do. So we're going to open it up for any questions from the audience here or anybody on Zoom that wants to chime in with a question or two. Feel free to do so.
On Zoom, please open your chat box and enter your question, and we'll go ahead and read it out loud to everyone. Also, anybody in the audience, raise your hand. I will go ahead and have you ask your question. Dwayne is going to repeat the question.
Yeah, Glow, what's the question?
Grub steak.
Okay, Dwayne.
Yeah.
Huge honor to be Miss Grubsteak.
Glow Cunningham has asked a question. She wants you to comment on what it was like being Miss Grubsteak.
It was wonderful. I was Miss Grubsteak. I entered the beauty contest that the owner of the Grubsteak decided to put on because the prize was $150, which was big bucks back then. And it was just enough money for me to buy a plane ticket to Arizona for the spring. So I entered it, and my secret to winning was not drinking. All the other girls that were in it, they were giving them free drinks and they were chugging them down. And I'm thinking, that's not a good idea. And we're wearing high heels going down these rickety steps down into the stage and then back off the stage. And we had a bathing suit contest and a talent contest and an evening gown contest, right?
What did you do for your talent?
I sang. A secondhand rose.
Oh.
Dedicated to my then boyfriend who was still seeing his previous girlfriend.
There was another hand back there.
What year was the wood stove changed?
What was the question?
What year was the wood stove changeover?
We think it was in the late 70s.
Yeah.
Not positive. I'll have to look that one up.
Yeah.
Sandy, we have someone asking online, when was the first Crested Butte art show?
Oh, the first one was in 1971.
Wow,
Yeah.
very good.
Yeah, it wasn't as like it was today, but
Go ahead.
So in your book, you know, the history of your career, et cetera, and you spoke to it here as well, the Crested Butte newspaper, the Chronicle, or whatever it was called in those days. Can you speak to how that waned and, you know, the period of time where it maybe closed down and how that now is the Crested Butte newspaper, right? Was there any connection between the two, or is the current newspaper totally separate from that?
okay.
The question is the transition from the Crested Butte Chronicle maybe to the current newspaper.
I started the Crested Butte Pilot, and the Crested Butte Chronicle had been going since 1964. It was actually started as kind of a ski area mouthpiece. So I started my Crested Butte Pilot in 72. Then I ran it until 76. And then it was purchased by the guy who cut my hair to give his girlfriend something to do. Well, she'll have something to do. So they broke up soon after. And the two couples, there were two couples that bought it. And so they sold it to the Crested Butte Chronicle, which by that time had been bought by, was being run by, anyway, they merged. Okay, the Chronicle and Pilot merged, and then that particular newspaper, Mark Riemann branched off and started the Weekly, and then the Weekly came in to the Chronicle and Pilot, and it became the Crested Butte News. Okay. It may say that on the masthead. I'm not sure. I'd have to look at that newspaper. Thank you.
Which it is today, the Crested Butte News. Yeah.
Today it's the Crested Butte News. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the audience?
We have another question online.
Shoot.
What year did Crested Butte stop heating with coal?
Oh, yes. We just had that question in, I think it was the late 70s.
Late 70s?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Remember to enter it into the chat button if you're watching online. Any other hands here?
But, you know, don't quote me on that 70s. It could have been the 80s too.
What's the question?
Any leftover coal stockpiles?
Oh, no, you know what? The coal was brought in from the OC mine. You mean the coal that people used to heat with, like this coal stove?
I heard you mention CD coal, so I was.
Crested Butte coal that was shipped out, but he wants.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, that came from the mines up here. And no, when they closed, that was it. When they closed those down. I was just referring to when it was in action, you know, production. Then that coal would be shipped out on rail cars, and you could see the coal. And on the side of the car would be this sticker or sign that said Crested Butte coal. Okay, but there's none still around because they closed the mines.
The interesting thing about shipping that coal out, it was shipped out on a narrow gauge with narrow gauge cars, because we had narrow gauge railroad all the way to Salida. And then when it got to Salida, it had to be transferred over to a broad gauge railroad because it was broad gauge into Pueblo where a lot of the coal went. And they had a big machine called a coal breaker, a barrel roller that would pick up a narrow gauge car, dump it upside down into a broad gauge car, and 3 of those filled up the broad gauge car and then went on to Pueblo.
See, I didn't know that.
Barrel roller, yeah. Any other questions? If not, we thank you folks for coming, and let's give Sandy a nice round of applause for being our first guest.
These books are also for sale here in the museum. They will make a fabulous Christmas present or a nice treasure to keep or to send to someone who has a Crested Butte connection. So once again, we appreciate all of you for coming in. This is a new thing. If you have any feedback, we'd love to hear it. And thanks to our members and those who've joined us online. So stay tuned. Next one is next week, which will be George Sibley. Same time, same place. So if you'd like to join us in person, please come down to the museum. We have the heat up. It's nice and warm in here. And we'd love to see you. So thanks again to Dwayne. Thanks again to Sandy. Thanks again to my staff too. We have Stu, we have Anna Marie, who have been technical geniuses, and to all of you for coming.
Yep. Thanks a lot for coming, folks. Appreciate it.